I don't even know why we buy ice cream still, but I guess that's...
It's so good.
Yeah. No. Anyway, sir. So thank you. I appreciate that because now I can take that back and try to make my own peppermint ice cream and make it better than you. So as I said, you're the commander of the Division Artillery Brigade, which has a lot of unique challenges. Like, so not only, and we'll even talk about when you were first here, you didn't properly own the field artillery battalions, but now you do, as that has changed over your tenure here. Excuse me. But you have a bunch of unique units. But so first off, if you don't mind, like when you come in, you're the Division Artillery Brigade without the field artillery battalions. Obviously, you still have a relationship with those folks and those units, but kind of what is that dynamic? And then when that changed, what do you think was like the biggest kind of change for artillery in the 1st Infantry Division?
Yeah, I think the dynamic was, it was about building relationships, right? So acknowledging that I didn't own the FA battalions, but as the senior field artillery officer and the division fire support coordinator, it was one, building that relationship at the division level to be, the CG's fire support coordinator, and then really with the maneuver brigade commanders, just all I want to do was be value added, so if they've got the FA battalions, then how do I help contribute to ensure that those FA battalions are doing what they need them to do in the BCTs? And thankfully I had, with Brian Harris and Ian Lauer back then, 2 great teammates that were totally open to me, helping out where I could without trying to get into someone's backyard too much, And so, again, I think it just came down to relationships. And then as it transitioned, what was cool about that, honestly, though, what probably most people don't know is the CG at the time brought us all in and said, hey, I'm thinking, the Army's indicated that they want to go back to FA battalions in the Divartes. I'm thinking I might want to do that before the Army. But he asked the 2 maneuver brigade commanders first. He's like, hey, how do you feel about this? And both those guys spoke up first and said, yeah, it makes sense, let's do it. And so at that point I said, okay, yeah. I mean, I was a little agnostic about it. I mean, obviously would love to have them, but also understood, the structure and was fine, if they stayed in the BCT too. But so when we made that call, I'd say the biggest change, Logan, was when I had been saying this for a year now, is we had been Divartes really in name alone. Yeah. So we'd stood up 1ID Divarti again, I think around 2015, but really it was a headquarters level element. Then we put the division headquarters battalion underneath it to have a subordinate unit, but fundamentally you had a brigade staff that hadn't really exercised being a brigade staff. And now with multiple subordinate battalions, it was one, developing a drum fire identity, right? So bringing in these FA battalions that have been a part of BCTs for years. So developing that drum fire identity. And then 2, really developing the brigade staff to be a no-kidding brigade staff. And my challenge to them was, hey, you need to be value added in this equation. Yeah. Right? Like, so don't be a second headquarters underneath these FA battalions that you're just pinging them for information and stuff like that, but show them that, hey, there's value in us, being your higher headquarters.
I think that's probably what you just brought up there about the drum fire mentality. I feel like that's probably one of the most overlooked things that you probably had to create, because you're right, you had a bunch of unique units. Yeah. HHBN, you had the VRC, you have a couple others that are just under you, and so not doing really the Divarti mission. However, when they go out and they have to do their table 18s and everything else, then yeah, hey, come out here and try to help us out, make sure that they're qualified and they get through their fire support tables. But then to bring them in where they had their devil and their dagger mentality. Yeah. It's like they were in those units, and then now you're, hey, actually this is home now. This is where you're supposed to be. Yeah. So was that a challenge, or was everyone pretty much like, hey, this is like, now we're here, like this is our unit. We're kind of to this new home, and this is where we want to be.
I would say they were pretty receptive to it, but you have to, like in my mind, and what I told the staff was we have to take some deliberate steps, right? Like this doesn't just happen. Yeah. And so, like, those were kind of my marching orders in this second year of command was, hey, how do we then develop that identity? And what are some tangible things that we can do in order to kind of facilitate that, some team building type events? So like the Best Buy tests, we just did this big Lieutenant Durham challenge, which was, kind of had a Mungadai type flavor to it, but I wanted to include senior NCOs too, so we did Sergeant First Class and above. But team building type crucible events that bring everyone together, that they go through together. And one of the biggest points behind the Durham challenge is we intermixed the teams, right? So it wasn't like you had a bunch of 1-5 teams, a bunch of 1-7, a bunch of HHB, and like everyone was intermixed, and it was a good team building event. When you came out of it, everyone that was successful, you earned a belt buckle. You got to come through the kind of the ceremony there at the end. Things like that, though. It's just that's what I said. I said it doesn't just happen, without tangible events that are going to lead you to that.
If it makes you feel any better, I did hear about the Durham Challenge, and it went well. From the person, my source, I won't tell you who the source is. If you know me, you probably know my source, but he said it went well. But with these R-Struck changes too, now they're adding more to your your guys' your plate as like a command. How do you now look at that and just, let's be honest, you kind of roll your eyes and be like, come on, seriously, another like another unit I have to, or is this, obviously you kind of look at it and say, okay, this is a new challenge.
Yeah, I think you got to approach it like a new opportunity, and they're all deliberate steps taken, and as we look at the R-Struck changes and some of these new formations coming in, there's no like natural fit. Like, okay,
right.
this so okay, and a couple times I've had the conversation like, hey, do you think you can take this on? Well, yeah, sure. I think I can. I think we can make it make sense here. So it's a new opportunity, a new challenge. We just brought in the law enforcement activity. I was at the MRBC, the Assumption of Command last week, I think, and we'll get them over, I think, on 1 October. So things like that are just that. Like it's no different. How do we be a higher headquarters to help facilitate their training, their requirements, all of that, and integrate them into the greater Drumfire team?
Obviously the MRBC is interesting. So if you're one of those folks, it's not that it's not, but it's the LEA, the law enforcement activity. To me that's an interesting one because they are now their subject matter expert and they're in the formation as far as like what they do. So there's a training responsibility on another unit that helps them out. But so where do you try to dive in to try to understand? Because maybe you knew a little bit about what they did, but probably not to the level of expertise a commander should try to know. So where does that kind of, now when I say roll your eyes, like that's now another thing that you got to peel back to hopefully understand what their job is a little bit. And so what's that like?
Yeah, it starts with that commander to commander dialogue, right? So once we realized they were coming over, and it actually, the timing worked out real well because they were about to do a change of command at the company commander level, and so we did a change of command out brief, and that was almost more for me than it was for them, just because it was a great opportunity to hear from the outgoing commander and she was really strong, and some of her lessons learned and things, and struggles and things. And, we identified, right there in that meeting, we identified 2 or 3 things that we could help the LEA with. And so it was like, okay, great. I can go all in on those 2 or 3 things and help them as they're, continuing to try to meet their mission here in and around post. So just it's really that continuing commander to commander dialogue about, hey, I don't want to be this like overarching, I need to be all up in your business, but how can I be value added in this equation?
How do I actually help you? And you just don't think you're, just coming here just, so we can parent you a little bit as far as like Army's considered. So as a commander here, you've been kind of put through a lot of different training exercises like most people go through, but you got the unique ability to go do an actual NTC as a DIVARTY, as almost like a true DIVARTY element, which there's a bunch of stuff that goes out with that, because one, you were in the dirt as part of a division that was also out there as well, which is a unique challenge. But what was exciting, and I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. So obviously you did the warfighter exercise where you got to do that same thing, but you were, it's all simulated. You're still out there, you're still commanding out in the field, with the battalion's MCP out there. Oh, sorry, brigade, excuse me. But then to actually get out there in the dirt, like what were some of the things that were so super cool that you're like, man, this is awesome that I actually get to come out here and do DIVARTY stuff? And then what were some of the things that you're like, wow, we need a lot of work, and we are, though I think we're ready, we need to grow a lot in these areas.
Yeah, I think the couple of things that differentiate, and this isn't going to be any new news, but differentiate maybe a warfighter from a division NTC rotation is there are so many, the sim works, right? The sim works all the time. So I need a unit to move from here to here. I push the button and it moves day or night, no matter what the weather conditions are, no matter how tired the soldiers are, and like it just happens, right? And they get there exactly when I want them to get there. If I want them resupplied, boom, it just happens. And so there's just, you can't replicate that. And so like to get out at NTC and see the entire formation out there doing their actual job with subordinate battalions, and we had an MLRS battalion 24FA out of Fort Sill that had, you know, done the whole progression with us, had come up here a number of times to work through all of the different, potential points of friction from what we had learned from the previous 1AD's division rotation. So then to get out there at NTC and do it real time and see that come into play, and so that's the benefit, right? The benefit is you're actually doing it, and you're not really simulating much of anything, and the soldiers, I think, really benefit from that as well. What did we learn? We learned, again, that you get a lot of false positives in a warfighter. And so once you actually see it in the dirt at NTC, you realize just how much additional friction is there and the impact it can have on a mission. Some tangible things that, that I just finished an article on, two very specific things that I kind of took away from our division rotation was, one, I think that our current air clearance procedures are still too restrictive. I think they're remnant of kind of our coin fight, and so I'm arguing. We right now operate basically usually with a coordinating altitude, right? Above about usually it's set around 20,000 feet, and so what that means is if I'm shooting anything above 20,000 feet, I have to go Mother May I to the Air Force.
It's fair.
And even though we were green on all our systems, so everything was talking, everything was up, that process can still take multiple minutes,
which is crucial.
Sounds
not a lot, but
when I've got positive identification of an HBTL target and I need to hit it immediately, and I'm taking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes to get clearance.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And if we're being realistic, I don't see us waiting in combat. I don't. If that's the case, then why don't we start practicing how we would actually do it in war?
Yeah, 100%.
And so my point is, one, the weapon systems that I'm employing at the division level are all going to bust 20,000 feet. They all are.
Yeah.
And so what are we doing? So my first argument is, hey, we really need to bump that up to like 60,000 feet, which, let's be honest, is just about everything, right? And so, but we looked and we did the math and saw like 90+% of our missions were, under the 60,000 foot mark. That'd be, if we controlled all that air, then that allows us to just free reign, shoot, whenever we need to, and manage our own airspace at the division level. And then the other part of that is the Air Force has been pretty clear about their piece in the LSCO fight. And by and large, they're going to be forward of our division boundary.
Right.
They're going to be doing things beyond our division boundary with their aircraft, which is all well and good and an important aspect of the fight, no doubt. But for us to set conditions for the division commander, we've got to own that airspace. And then the second part that I really took away was, this the JAGIC, which is what we use at the division level to kind of manage the airspace, I think is also a little redundant and unnecessary. And it has to do, if you look back at the coin fight, we had these really small pieces of terrain, and we would have stacks of aircraft, every 5,000 feet. Right. And so that's what the JAGIC did. It did the joint air-ground integration and kind of managed those stacks of aircraft. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. Again, I'm talking about by and large, the air is going to be is going to be taken up by artillery, MLRS, UAVs, and attack aviation. And I don't think we require the robustness of a JAGIC, which is a lot of people.
Yep.
And I don't think that is necessary. And that would really, my point is that would really allow, as we continue to try to reduce the signature of a division level CP, and give a division commander some additional flexibility in terms of, even having a main CP and an alternate CP, just going back to like a division fire support element with all the requisite people that you need to manage that, I think would be far more effective.
So then where do you put those folks then? Like, do you say like still keep them with just a smaller element?
It's just a smaller element. That's right.
And then you get back some folks, and I'm not saying because like, you're trying to steal folks back,
yeah.
But then you get some folks back that can actually be better served in the fire.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those Air Force, we still have a TAC-P presence. Obviously, that's going to be, because there still are going to be fixed wing. And so we'll still have a TAC-P presence, but the large Air Force package probably moves up, right, at least the corps level or something like that. And then with the division level, again, it's just a much more reduced package but it will give the division commander everything he or she needs.
So speaking of the division commander, not specifically ours, but just the concept of live, a live division headquarters. How do you think, oh gosh, this sounds silly, but how do you think that went as far as you actually get to practice fighting like a division fights? It wasn't just like, okay, go do your table 18s, go do your fire support coordination exercises, and we'll kind of be here. But it was like, nope, we are here, like we are sending you guys missions, or we're fighting this thing just as live as you are. How do you think that integration kind of was, or how do you feel like that relationship went?
Yeah, I think it was good, and I think it provides the division commander the opportunity to really see the division fight and where they can contribute in terms of setting conditions for the maneuver brigades to close with and destroy the enemy, right? So like, how do we set those conditions with fires, with attack aviation, and with sustainment? And in real time, you had the division NTC rotation provides you the opportunity to do that in real time with those formations on the ground, and kind of synchronize those efforts for the BCTs that are going to complete the fight.
Which is something that he's never fought a division before, right? So like in reality, so it's just interesting. Obviously he's more incapable, but it's just good to see and put all those pieces together.
Yeah.
From being on the inside looking out and like watching everything go and listening to everything happen. It was interesting just for my foxhole, and I'm just waiting for everything to move and happen. So, so I think NTC ended up being obviously a great experience for everybody, and I'm glad it was for you guys, especially in the soldiers that were out there getting to actually do their thing. So I'm going to take you back a little bit to when you were probably the most physically fit you've ever been, which was just when you were coming in. So how did you commission? What was your commissioning source, sir?
I went to West Point.
Okay, awesome. So going through West Point, and you kind of hopefully maybe had some ideas. I don't know if you wanted to be a field artillery officer. Maybe you can get into that here in a second. But who were some of the inspirational leaders that you looked at? Because obviously inspirational leadership is huge in the 1st Infantry Division. We preach it on everything that we do. So who are those folks for you? And it could be, the World War II greats. I'm not asking you to scale it here. That you looked at as you were coming through West Point, and then as you were like a second lieutenant.
Yeah, I think for me. So I'm an Army brat, and I'm probably going to give you more than you need to know, Logan. But
no, this is good. That's what I want to
know. So I grew up around the Army. Obviously, I'm the youngest of 3. My older brother and sister just went to regular college, did their own thing. Never did the Army thing. But I was always interested in West Point. My dad had gone to West Point. I was always interested in it. I would say, though, if I'm being perfectly honest, back then at least, probably for pretty selfish reasons. Like, I just liked the idea of West Point. So my sophomore year, my dad was like, "Hey, you've never been there. How about I take you?" We went for a trip, and absolutely fell in love with it. Like, he was like, "Yeah, I want to go there." But again, I'm not really sure what my motivation was, because my other school was like University of Tennessee, and I remember my dad at one point was like, "Hey, you haven't put in for an ROTC scholarship. Do you want to do that?" I was like, "No." Like,
no nudging.
Why would I want to go ROTC? So I entered West Point and graduated West Point very much a 5 and out mentality. Okay. I liked the idea of West Point. I actually loved my time there. I had a great experience, and really, really legitimately enjoyed it, but was not particularly interested in a career in the Army. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I like to say I was in the top of the bottom third of my class. So I didn't have a lot of options for posting, and so I posted Fort Bragg, and so went down to OBC, and while I was at OBC is when 9/11 happened, and at the time my dad was actually in the Pentagon, so that's a pretty vivid memory for me, because I remember someone saying playing for the World Trade Center, playing for another World Trade Center, and walked out there, and then it was all it said is it hit the Army side of the Pentagon. I just knew my dad worked on the Army side of the Pentagon, and it took better part of the day to kind of get through the phone line, stuff like that, to find out he was okay, but was helping with kind of evac and casualties and stuff like that. And so that kind of like, it started getting a little bit more realistic, and went to Ranger School after OBC and got to Fort Bragg, and so yeah, I'd say my dad was probably my first inspirational leader. Actually, my father-in-law too also served and was a pretty awesome role model, and just really adored him. And then I got to my first unit, and I tell people I think that's really what's kind of steered me towards going beyond 5 years, because I had an amazing chain of command, like literally from captain to brigade commander level.
That's unheard of.
It was ridiculous. And just to give you a flavor, like my battalion commander was Charlie Flynn, who just retired as a 4-star USARPAC commander. My brigade commander was John Campbell, also retired 4-star. My artillery battalion commander was Tewksbury, and he retired as a colonel, but this is the kind of caliber guy he was. When I was a battalion commander, he wrote to me and said, "Hey, I'd really like to come to your change of command. I've made it to every single one of my former officers who've made it to battalion command." Wow. So he and his wife like flew out. Like that's just the kind of caliber guy he was. So I very quickly, we did a deployment. Went to OEF 1 with the 82nd. I came back. I learned about an opportunity to do a Ranger Regiment. Had never had a clue that field artillery officers could go to Ranger Regiment. And I remember I had a pretty candid conversation with my wife at one point. I was like, "Hey, so I'm actually thinking maybe I want to stay in through command. Like, how do you feel about that?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." She was kind of indifferent at the time. And so we sought the opportunity to go to Ranger Regiment. Did that again. Amazing experience, amazing leaders. Some of the people that I'm still super close with to this day. And just loved that opportunity. Went to the career course, got an opportunity to go to the 173rd, deployed again, went into command, and just kind of went from there. And from that point forward, and this is what I've told people, all my officers that come in for counseling, is that we've kind of taken it day by day, or at least assignment by assignment, and said, "Hey, how are we doing as a family? Especially as kids started coming into the mix.
Right.
Are we still having fun? Are our kids doing well? Is there something else we want to do?" And we've all, at this point at least, collectively come to the agreement, like, "Nah, we're still having fun. Kids love it. Like, maybe I'll stay in if I could go do this." And that door opens. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll stay in if maybe I could do that. Well, yeah, okay. And, and so it just kind of played out that way. I didn't answer your question about field artillery. It wasn't my top choice. I thought first I wanted to be a pilot, but then I failed miserably the numbers and the dots. I still think that's
it's rigged.
I think it's rigged.
Yeah, it's
I don't think there's any numbers in those dots.
Aviator we had on said it's rigged.
I'm convinced of that.
He just memorized the answers.
Then I thought I wanted to be a tanker until I spent a day in a tank in Fort Knox as a cadet and puked in my helmet and realized that's pretty miserable.
You're a little tall.
And then I thought I wanted to be infantry. And I still think I would have really enjoyed my infantry time, but as I went back to West Point, it became time to like get close to choosing a branch. I started thinking about like the officer that had the biggest impact on me at West Point, and it kept coming back to like all these field artillery officers. I was like, wow, maybe I'll try that instead. So it was kind of a 50-50.
I always thought it was an illiterate thing because you draw your uppercase T's upside downs for ones, and so I always thought like if you couldn't count,
there might be that too. There might be
bit.
that.
So now as you've made an illustrious career, let's be honest, like you are a brigade commander. Not everybody makes it that far. It's a great opportunity. I'm sure you'll say there's no drawbacks. There's nothing that sucks about it at all. But what do you tell or what do you try to share, impart, if you will, to either the junior NCOs and lieutenants that come into your formation that that maybe complain about the Army a little bit. Maybe they're not seeing the same things that either you saw, or like to help them understand like what.
Yeah, the things I tell them are like one of the first counselings I had. A first battalion commander I had, which was not any of the people I highlighted to you earlier, sat me down and said, "Hey, here's your 20-year career. Tell me exactly." And he gave me he was like, now, and it was like here to here, and this is how you get to battalion command. And it was like a very clear path, and it was just like,
this is your path.
Holy crap! And it was just kind of like, I don't want to do that, and that doesn't interest me at all. And it was just really kind of off-putting, And like I'll go back to what I said. I mean, fundamentally, what Amy and I have done as we've approached our career is sought out the things that we thought that I was like uniquely interested in, and opportunities that and I can think of at least 3 or 4 times in my career where I've kind of gone against best career advice, right?
Yeah.
About, well, Jeff, you don't want to do that. That'll take you off the battalion command path
right,
or whatever. And it's like, okay,
So be
but
it.
this is what we think is right for our family. And I think the Army is now kind of recognized that, hey, we're a pretty good meritocracy, and we need to be able to identify talent no matter what, an officer or an NCO chooses to do, within limits, right? But I remember having a great conversation with a classmate and actually former Ranger buddy of mine. We were both at battalion pre-command course at Fort Sill. So we'd both been selected for tactical FA battalion command, and he was at branch. So he was kind of behind the curtain when this whole process happened. And we had finished class for the day, and we're running to the gym. He's like, Jeff, I've been dying to have this conversation with you. He's like, we were all so curious if you were going to get battalion command. And I was like, Ben, I don't know what to take from that.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, he's like, because we all saw your file, and it was like super strong, and we thought, you should be competitive, but it was just so counter to what everyone says you need to do to get battalion command. So I take that as kind of a point of pride and say, hey, look, and that's what I tell my officers and NCOs, do the things that you're passionate about. Like, don't feel like I got to go do this job because I have this goal, and in order to do that, I need to go do this. Like, seek out the opportunities that you're passionate about, because I am convinced the thing that has kept me in the military 100% has been that I have done the things and I've sought the opportunities that I wanted to do.
Yep.
Right? And it has provided me the opportunity to have some pretty awesome jobs. And that has been awesome. And the second thing I try to tell people is we have got to be okay with failure. Like, I have personally learned the most when I have failed. And so what I try to create at every level that I've commanded and led at is an environment where it is safe to fail. And then there is a great beauty in retraining. And that if we can establish an environment where it's safe to fail, I feel like that's where leaders learn. Like, that's where learning happens. And I'll be the first to admit and acknowledge the many times throughout my career that I have failed, and the leaders that I've had that have said, all right, Jeff, well, you screwed that up. How about we try that again,
That's actually one of my favorite things that you just mentioned. It's foster, because it's easy for you to foster in that environment when it's your level. Like, hey, if wherever I could assume risk at, it's easy for me to try to help the company and battalion commanders to understand, hey, you're going to fail, and it's going to hurt, and I might even make it hurt myself for you, but we're going to grow through this.
That's right.
But where, at some point that risk goes above your level, and failure is still probably likely in some cases. So how do you teach them through that so that hey, we're still, is the message any different, or is it still just like, nope, we're in this together. I'm going to take that shotgun blast this time, but we're going to get through this.
Yeah, no, you've got to practice what you preach, right? And I will always underwrite an honest mistake.
Yeah,
right. Like, again, if I'm establishing an environment where it's safe to, I've got batteries out right now doing table 15s. And, my mantra with the OCT teams is we've got 3 batteries going through 3 table 15 lanes. If I have all 3 batteries first time goes, that's on us. That we didn't make it hard enough.
It's fair.
We didn't make it hard enough.
Yeah.
They should not all 3 be first time goes. It's not that I want people to fail, but we've got to make it so challenging that they've got to at least retrain certain aspects of that lane, because this is how they get better.
Yeah.
If a battery cruises through a training event, it's like, that was easy. Then how much growth actually occurred? But when I've got a gunny or a section chief or a platoon sergeant or platoon leader or an FDO going, holy crud, that was one of the hardest things I've done, and I learned this, this, and this. And I'm so glad that we retrained that, because I love to tell the story when I was a battalion commander and I would do platoon qualifications, table 12s. So you've got 6 platoons going through, and we would typically get anytime I would do this, we'd typically get 2 platoons that would make it straight through, and then you'd get probably about 2 platoons that would be a full recock, like off ramp the platoon, retrain for a few days, and then you're going to go through again, and then you've got 2 platoons that maybe would have to retrain certain aspects of the lane, right? Mm-hmm. Every single time I did it, the best platoons that performed were the retraining ones. And you would watch this like emotional arc, right? Like, you would watch them as they'd come through the first lane, and then they'd get told, hey, you're a no-go, and then the platoon leader and platoon sergeant would just like feel awful and be like, oh, and they'd, and I'd bring them in and be like, okay, so what'd you screw up? Well, sir, I screwed this up. Yeah, okay, all right, but so how are you gonna, and I'd help them plot their way forward for the next 2 or 3 days as they retrain, you know, and then they'd kind of, okay, all right, and they go back out there, leave them alone, just let them go train their platoon, and then they'd come back in the lane, and then they would see, right, like they would see, holy crud, we're doing it now, and you would just watch, like, so you'd be kind of this, and then just, you know, and then they would just take off, and then to watch them come off that lane, knowing what they had accomplished from where they had been,
right.
you know, like, you can't fabricate that.
No, that confidence is...
And so, but that only comes with setting up, like, no kidding, tough, realistic training in which that kind of growth happens.
So, to kind of take it a different direction, so like I said, you're on the tail, not the tail end. Yeah, you're at the tail end of your career, however long that goes from here. But you mentioned before you have a son that's graduating high school and he's about to go into college. Now he's not going into the military, at least right away, or he's. You know, but that's a huge life transition, and you guys are going overseas, and he's going to be staying here. You know, how do you do that from a parenting perspective? As far as like, is it the same sort of, hey, you're going to fail and good luck, or you just kind of hope that the 18 years.
I'll let you know when I figure it out, Logan.
I think that's why I'm taking notes. I have a 7-year-old that I'm.
A couple thoughts on this, right? So again, I'm an Army brat. My wife's an Army brat, both career Army officers, and it always kind of breaks my heart a little bit when an officer comes into my counseling or comes into my office for refried counseling and it's like, well, I'm about to start a family, and I just don't want to do that to my kids, and I'm like,
I would, that's
what do you mean?
The emotional sensitivity that people have.
I'll be the first to acknowledge that there are kids out there that struggle with the Army lifestyle, right? And the thing that I tell anyone that's in that is like, hey, you got to always vote for your family, right? Like 100%. And if you've got kids, I mean, I have one of my dearest friends who was a very successful brigade commander. I think was well on his way to continued progression. And their fourth and youngest kid started having some adjustment issues. They were trying to figure out what was going on. You know, they saw a bunch of counselors, and fundamentally, what came down to it is, hey, she just needs stability. She can't keep moving. And he was like, okay, cool. And he retired, and they are like happy as all get out, thriving, and so like you've got to be able to make that decision. But the opposite's also true. Like like I said, we have this conversation every time it comes about time to move, and looking at another opportunity, we bring all the kids in, we say, how are we doing? And I can only speak for my kids, right? Like my kids have loved their Army lifestyle. I'm very excited to do so.
Well, outside of learning how the first year goes with your son, I'm excited to hear how the first year and how that transition goes with you, sir. So I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
So we'll do a digital version of this to
sure.
make sure you're doing okay. Well, sir, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate taking this time. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.